It begins on a night that feels too still. The kind of night where even the hum of the city outside seems to have died, leaving behind only the faint electric whisper of old wires buried deep in the walls. Mia sits alone in her small off-campus apartment, third floor, corner unit, with nothing but a flickering CRT television for company. She doesn't even know why she keeps it. It doesn't work properly, the image always full of static. But she likes the sound. It makes her feel less alone. The clock on the wall reads 2:37 a.m. Her coffee's gone cold. Her phone battery is almost dead. And she's too tired to study yet too restless to sleep. That's when she hears it. Something faint behind the static. A rhythm. Cadence. For a moment, she thinks the television might have picked up a lost signal from a nearby radio tower. She leans closer, squinting at the shifting gray haze on the screen. There's a whisper, so soft, she almost convinces herself she imagined it. Then it happens again. Mia. Her name. Spoken so quietly it feels like breath against her ear, not sound from a speaker. She jerks backward, heart racing, staring at the screen. It's just static. A chaotic sea of white noise. She turns off the TV, silence filling the room like water in lungs. Then, after a few seconds, the static hum returns. The screen flickers on by itself. She tries to laugh it off, but her reflection in the black glass of the screen looks wrong somehow. Off angle. Like her reflection's eyes move a split second later than she does. The fear creeps in quietly at first, the rational part of her brain whispering, power surge, bad wiring, nothing to worry about. But deep down, she feels it, that primal wrongness. That ancient instinct that tells you you're not alone. The next night, the same thing happens. She's lying on her bed, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly just to fill the silence. The TV, unplugged this time, sits across the room. Still, faintly, she hears it again. Static hissing softly like it's trying to form words. The sound is coming from the unplugged set. Mia freezes. She walks slowly toward it, heart pounding so hard she can hear blood rushing in her ears. The whisper returns, more distinct now. Mia, why did you stop watching? Her breath catches. She doesn't respond. She can't. The room feels colder now, the air heavy, each breath visible. The whisper continues, a tone like a smile hidden behind the sound. You looked away. Don't look away again. Every hair on her arms stands up. She grabs her phone, opens the flashlight, and shines it at the screen. The static dims slightly, like something inside it blinked. For just half a second, she sees what looks like a shadow behind the noise. Her own silhouette, but twisted, head tilted just enough to seem inhuman. She drops the phone. The light rolls across the floor, scattering into beams that catch on dust motes and old wallpaper. The static grows louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. She reaches out, trembling, and pulls the power cord from the wall. Darkness, silence, relief. Then, from that silence, another voice. Her voice echoes softly from the dark TV screen. Don't leave me here. The following days blur together. Mia stops sleeping properly. Every time she closes her eyes, she dreams of static, gray snow falling endlessly, and a shadowy version of herself walking through it. Her reflection in mirrors seems delayed, lagging like a bad video feed. At first, she avoids looking too long. But on the third night, she decides she has to prove to herself that she isn't losing her mind. She sets up her phone to record. She sits facing the unplugged TV, camera rolling. For an hour, nothing happens. Just her own reflection in the dark screen. She starts laughing nervously at her paranoia. Then, just as she leans forward to turn the recording off, the TV flickers. Once, her reflection smiles. Not her. The one in the screen. She freezes, paralyzed. Her reflection tilts its head slowly to the side, a motion she doesn't make. The grin widens until it stretches unnaturally far, cracking along the edges. The voice returns, louder now, perfectly clear, layered with her own tone but deeper, like two versions of her speaking together. Stay with me, Mia. It's quieter here. The recording catches everything. Her gasp, the trembling, the desperate click of the phone falling to the floor as she stumbles backward. The screen distorts. Static surges like a storm. The power in the apartment cuts out entirely. When she wakes, the room is quiet. Her phone lies next to her, battery dead. The TV is dark again, unplugged, but written in faint gray condensation across the glass are words that make her stomach twist. See you tonight. The story ends the way it began, with static. The faint hiss of something trying to form words in the silence. As the scene fades, the narrator's voice returns, low and deliberate, describing how the police later found Mia's phone still recording. The footage showed her sleeping, peaceful, in front of the dark screen. Then, halfway through the night, a shape steps out of the reflection, identical to her, and lies down beside her. The whisper returns one last time, barely audible under the hum of white noise. Keep watching, and then silence. The static fades into darkness, pulling the listener forward into the next story. A faint sound of a car engine idling in the distance, headlights cutting through fog, leading into the next encounter that waits somewhere in the woods. The fog lay heavy that night, a slow-moving blanket over the winding forest road. The headlights of the old pickup sliced through it in uneven cones of light, catching glimpses of trees like gray skeletons rising from the dark. In the cab, the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the boy asleep in the passenger seat. His name was Eli, 12 years old, too young to understand the kind of silence that feels alive. His father, Mark, kept one hand on the steering wheel and one eye on the clock glowing faintly on the dash. 11:43 p.m. They were almost home. Then, through the static of a weak radio signal, a sound broke through. A child crying. Soft, distant, muffled, like it came from somewhere just outside the car. Mark frowned, leaning closer to the windshield, turning the radio off completely. But the crying didn't stop. It was clearer now, a young voice sobbing, echoing faintly from the woods to his right. He slowed the truck, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Eli stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Dad? What's wrong?" Mark nodded toward the trees. "You hear that?" For a moment they both listened. The crying rose again, wet and desperate, the kind of sound that hooks into the chest and pulls. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. Eli's eyes widened. "It sounds like a kid." Mark hesitated. They were miles from the nearest house, deep in the Cascades. The responsible part of him, the part that fixed fences, paid bills, kept promises, told him he couldn't ignore it. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove box. "Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. I'll check." Eli nodded, still half asleep, fear already curling at the edges of his voice. "Don't be long." Mark stepped out, boots crunching the damp gravel. The night hit him all at once. Cold, sharp, filled with the smell of pine and wet earth. The beam of his flashlight cut a thin path through the fog. He called out, "Hey! Hello? Are you hurt?" No answer. Just that crying, now softer, coming from deeper in the woods. He followed it, heart pounding, stepping carefully between ferns and roots slick with dew. The sound stayed just out of reach, moving as he moved, always a few steps ahead. Then it stopped. He froze, listening. Silence. His own breath sounded too loud. He took another step. That's when he heard it again. Not crying this time, but whispering. His name. "Mark!" He swung the light toward the sound, every instinct in him screaming to run, but curiosity rooted him. "Who's there?" he called, voice trembling. "Do you need help?" The whisper came again, closer. "Mark, help me." It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was Eli's. He turned, panic flooding through him. The flashlight trembled in his hand. "Eli," he shouted. "You stay in the truck. You hear me?" But the voice kept coming, broken between gasps, muffled by the fog. "Dad, please. I'm lost." He stumbled forward, desperate, the beam of light flicking across tree trunks until it caught on something pale in the distance. A small figure crouched near the base of a tree. Relief hit him like air after drowning. "Eli!" he yelled, running forward. But as he got closer, the relief drained away. It wasn't his son. The shape stood slowly, too tall, its limbs bending wrong, jerky, like it was remembering how to move. Its head tilted toward him and the crying returned, except now it was coming from that thing's mouth. The sound was layered, like multiple voices crying at once. A dozen children sobbing in unison. The flashlight beam flickered, catching its face for half a second. Pale skin, too smooth, no eyes, just dark hollows that reflected the light back. Mark stumbled backward, breath breaking, every nerve in his body screaming to run. The thing stopped crying. Then, in perfect mimicry, it spoke again in his son's voice. "Dad, where are you going?" He turned and bolted. Branches snapped, the ground soft and uneven beneath him. He could hear it behind him, crawling now, the sound of joints cracking like dry sticks. He burst through the treeline and saw the truck up ahead. Lights still on, engine running. Eli was standing outside the truck, looking into the woods. "Eli, get in the truck!" Mark screamed, sprinting toward him. The boy didn't move. He just kept staring past his father, into the darkness behind him. Mark grabbed him by the arm and shoved him into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. The truck roared to life, headlights spilling onto the road. He hit the gas, tires spinning against the gravel until they caught. As they sped away, Mark dared to glance into the rearview mirror. The figure was standing at the edge of the road, perfectly still, head tilted, watching. For a moment he thought it was over until Eli spoke. "Dad?" Mark's breath caught. "Yeah, buddy?" Eli's voice was small, trembling. "If you were with me, then who was that outside the truck?" Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. He didn't answer. The air inside the cab felt wrong. Too heavy, too cold. From the radio, which had been silent until now, came a faint burst of static. Then, softly, a voice that wasn't either of theirs whispered through the speakers. "Don't leave me alone out here." Mark slammed his hand against the power button, killing the sound. They drove the rest of the night in silence, neither daring to speak again. By the time dawn broke, the fog had thinned, and the world looked almost normal. But when Mark stopped at a diner an hour later to calm his nerves, he noticed something that froze his blood. On the passenger window, traced faintly into the condensation, were the marks of small fingers, too small to be Eli's. 8 of them, smudged against the glass, reaching inward. That night, when they finally made it home, Eli went straight to bed without a word. Mark sat alone in the living room, staring at his hands. The silence of the house pressed in around him, familiar but fragile. He turned the television on just to fill the air, the screen flickering with static. And beneath that static, faint, almost hidden, came a voice he swore he'd heard before, whispering from deep inside the woods, "Mark!" His hand froze on the remote. He didn't move. Outside, in the yard, something cried softly. Not human, not animal, something between the two. The sound faded, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator, blending seamlessly with the low static of the TV. The camera would hold on that image, Mark sitting frozen, eyes locked on the flickering screen, as the sound of tires on gravel slowly fades in from a distant memory, merging into the next story's beginning. Rain had a way of making the city feel quieter, like it pressed sound down into the concrete until everything moved in slow motion. Elena had only lived in her new apartment for a week, but the sound of the rain was already her favorite part. Soft, steady, wrapping around the building like a lullaby. She sat cross-legged on the floor that night, cardboard boxes still half unpacked, a steaming mug of tea beside her. She liked the stillness, the privacy. After years of sharing walls, roommates, and noise, finally, she had a place that was hers. But the illusion of peace never lasts long in a city like this. It was close to midnight when she first heard it. Faint footsteps from the ceiling above her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Old buildings groan and shift. The neighbors move around, that's just life. Except, she was on the top floor. She frowned, pausing mid-sip. The footsteps were deliberate, slow, measured, like someone pacing. Then came a soft thud, as if something heavy had fallen, followed by dragging. The sound traveled across the ceiling from one end of the room to the other and stopped directly above where she sat. Elena stayed still, listening, heartbeat ticking loud in her ears. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. She whispered to herself, maybe it's pipes or squirrels or... But the sound came again, the unmistakable rhythm of bare feet on wood. The next morning, she asked her landlord about it. The tenant upstairs, she said with a tired smile. I think they're moving furniture at night. The landlord looked up from his paperwork, eyebrows knitting. Upstairs? He repeated. There is no upstairs, Miss Rivera. You're in the attic unit. Nobody lives above you. Her stomach sank. You mean there's just roof space? Empty, he said. No access unless through maintenance. Don't worry, you're the only one up there. She forced a polite laugh, pretending to believe him, but something about the way his eyes lingered on her made her uneasy. That night, she left a lamp on and turned on some soft music to drown out the silence. It worked for a while, until just past 2 a.m. when the light began to flicker and the sound returned, heavier this time. A dragging, scraping noise, then faintly the sound of breathing. She stared at the ceiling, pulse quickening. Hello? She called softly, her voice trembling. The sound stopped. She waited, holding her breath, but there was only the rain again, tapping like fingertips on glass. The next morning, exhaustion clung to her like fog. She barely slept. When she looked at the ceiling, she noticed faint discolorations forming in one corner, dark stains spreading outward like veins. She told herself it was water damage. Nothing more. By the fourth night, the sounds became bolder. Footsteps, dragging, sometimes even the faint shuffle of papers. She began recording the noise on her phone. Each time, the playback caught only silence, except for one instance, where a single word echoed faintly in the background. Down. Her stomach dropped when she heard it. Down. Like an invitation. On the fifth night, she decided to test something. She climbed onto a chair and tapped on the ceiling 3 times. The sound that came back froze her blood. 3 knocks. Faint, but unmistakable. A reply. She stumbled down from the chair, her breath trembling. She wanted to run, but where could she go? The night stretched on, long and heavy. When she finally fell asleep near dawn, she dreamed of footsteps circling her bed, slow and deliberate, until they stopped just above her head. That afternoon, she went to the landlord again, voice shaking. There's someone up there, she insisted. You have to check. He sighed, reluctant, but eventually fetched the keys to the roof access. Together they climbed the narrow stairwell, the air growing colder with each step. When he pried open the old attic door, a rush of stale air hit them, dry, cold, untouched. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of intrusion. See, he said, trying to sound casual. No one's been up here in years. But Elena's eyes caught something. In the far corner, behind an old support beam, a single dusty plate sitting neatly on the floor. It looked out of place. On it, crumbs. Someone's been here, she whispered. That night, she decided to leave an offering. She placed a fresh plate of food on the floor beneath the spot she heard the noises most often. A small peace offering, maybe an act of desperation. If you need this, she murmured softly, take it. She stayed awake on the couch, staring at the plate, eyes burning with exhaustion. Around 3:10 a.m., the temperature dropped. The shadows stretched along the walls. She heard movement again, faint, dragging, then a creak. A low thud. The plate rattled once and went still. When morning came, the plate was empty. No sign of who or what had touched it. But scrawled into the thin layer of dust beside it were 3 faint words, written in uneven letters. Thanks for company. Elena's chest tightened. She couldn't stay there anymore. She called her sister that afternoon, begging to stay at her place for a few nights. While on the call, she heard it again. 3 knocks from above, steady and patient, as if it knew she was leaving. That night, while packing, She paused one last time beneath the ceiling. Her reflection stared back faintly from the dark window, rain distorting her features. The lights flickered once, twice. Then, from the ceiling above her, came one final knock, followed by her own voice whispering back, perfectly mimicked, "Thanks for the company." Her phone slipped from her hand. The recording caught everything. The whisper, the creak, the long pause of silence afterward. Later, when her sister arrived to help her move, the apartment was empty. The only thing left behind was the plate. Back on the floor, food untouched, and a small dark stain beside it shaped like a handprint pressed into the dust. The camera would linger on that, a still shot of the plate and the faint print, with the echo of knocking repeating softly under the score. Then, slowly, the sound of rain fades into static, merging seamlessly with the next story. The couple had been searching for months, scrolling through listings and visiting open houses until they were numb from smiling at real estate agents and pretending they could see potential in places that smelled like mildew and disappointment. When they found the old farmhouse on the edge of town, it felt like luck. Too good to be true, really. A wraparound porch, tall trees whispering in the wind, a wide yard where light fell soft and golden in the evenings. It was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but the paperwork checked out. "It just needs love," the agent said with a grin. They signed the papers the same week. Mark and Laura moved in during the spring, full of excitement and plans. The first few days were perfect. The smell of fresh paint, new curtains, laughter echoing through empty halls. At night, the house creaked in familiar ways, like any old building settling. But after a few weeks, the noises changed. It started small, faint breathing sounds when the house was quiet. Laura noticed it first, late one night while brushing her teeth. The sound was rhythmic, soft inhale, gentle exhale, coming from the walls. She turned off the faucet and listened, heart skipping. It stopped when she did. The silence that followed was worse somehow, thick and watchful. She laughed it off when she told Mark the next morning. "Our house snores," she joked. But when he laughed back, she saw something uneasy flicker in his eyes. A few nights later, they were watching a movie when the lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. Mark frowned and looked around. "Power surge." Laura shivered. "Do you feel that?" The air felt different, heavier, like a pressure drop before a storm. The curtains swayed gently even though the windows were shut. Then the house exhaled, a slow, hollow sigh that rolled through the walls and up the staircase. They both froze. "Must be air trapped in the vents," Mark said finally, but his voice wavered. He stood, pretending to check the thermostat, pretending not to be scared. But the air continued to pulse, in and out, steady as a heartbeat. Over the next few days, the signs grew stranger. They would find doors slightly ajar that they were sure had been closed. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, enough for their breath to fog. The smell of something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit, drifted through the halls at night. Laura started hearing whispers when she was alone. Not words exactly, more like the faint murmur of someone thinking aloud, just out of reach. One evening, she decided to clean out the basement. Dust motes floated through slanted beams of light from a narrow window. The air was cold, still. She found old boxes left by the previous owners, newspapers, children's toys, photo albums half-eaten by mold. She was flipping through one when she noticed something strange. The last few photos showed the same dining table she and Mark used upstairs. Same tablecloth, same plates. But there was something off about the people in the picture, blurred faces and one empty chair. When she called for Mark, he came down holding a flashlight. "What is it?" "Look," she said, pointing at the photos. This room. And that's our table." He frowned, studying them. "These must be from years ago. Weird, though." Before he could say more, the flashlight flickered, then went out completely. The darkness felt sudden, solid, suffocating. They both froze. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls came that sound again, breathing. Not the steady sigh of before. This time it was wet, uneven, as if the house was struggling to inhale. They stumbled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind them. Mark leaned against it, panting. "It's an old house," he said, trying to convince himself. "It just needs repairs." But neither of them slept that night. The next day, Laura found something disturbing in the dining room. The chairs had been pulled out, the table set neatly with plates and silverware they didn't own. Dust-covered, but arranged with precision. On each plate sat a thin layer of gray ash. When Mark came home from work and saw it, his face went pale. "Laura, did you?" She shook her head before he could finish. That night, the breathing grew louder. The walls seemed to pulse with it, expanding and contracting subtly, almost imperceptibly, until you looked too long, and then you couldn't unsee it. The wallpaper fluttered as if stirred by invisible lungs. The floors creaked with each inhalation, and the air itself seemed to tighten, pressing against their skin. The couple fled into the yard, gasping for real air. When they turned back toward the house, they saw movement in the windows, curtains shifting, shadows pacing. Then, as if mocking them, the front door creaked open slowly on its own, releasing a deep, wet sigh. Mark wanted to leave, to pack and go. But Laura hesitated. "What if someone's trapped in there?" she whispered, irrational, trembling. "What if it's not just the house?" He stared at her, eyes wide. "Then we'll call the police. We're not going back in." But that night, unable to resist, Laura did. She crept back inside while Mark slept in the car. The air felt thicker, warmer, like the inside of a living thing. She whispered, "If you're here, please stop. Please let us go." The floor beneath her feet pulsed once, faintly. She backed away toward the door, but the hallway stretched, the walls seeming to breathe around her. The wallpaper rippled, and the shadows bent like ribs expanding. She could hear it, the sound of heartbeats behind plaster. Then something warm touched her hand. She looked down and saw the wall pressing gently against her palm, soft and pliant like flesh. She screamed. Mark woke to the sound and ran inside, flashlight shaking. "Laura!" he called. The light caught her for an instant. Half of her body pressed into the wall, fingers clawing at the air, face twisted in horror. He grabbed her arm and pulled, but the wall tightened, gripping her like wet clay. Her voice broke. "It's breathing." Then the house exhaled. The force threw him backward. Dust rained from the ceiling. When he looked up, Laura was gone. The wall was smooth again. No trace of her except a faint outline of fingers pressed into the plaster, already fading. He stumbled outside, screaming her name until his voice gave out. But the only answer was the sound of the wind through the trees, and the faint, rhythmic sound of breathing coming from the house behind him. When the police arrived, they found Mark sitting on the porch, motionless. The dining table inside was set for two, candles burning, and two plates filled with gray ash. No trace of Laura was ever found. Later that night, when the investigators packed up and left, the house stood alone, silent in the moonlight. Then, slowly, almost tenderly, it inhaled. The shot would linger there, the curtains drawing inward slightly, a single window pane fogging as though the house itself were alive. The sound of that breath would fade into the next story's opening, the quiet hum of a radio in an empty guard booth. The security guard had worked the night shift at the factory for almost 6 years, and in all that time he had learned one unshakable truth: the world changes after midnight. Everything felt stretched thinner, like reality itself was just one layer deep, and under it, something else was breathing. His name was Tom Grayson, 53 years old, tired eyes, coffee-stained thermos always at his side. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but he did believe in patterns. And lately, the patterns had been wrong. The factory itself was an old brick structure on the outskirts of town, long abandoned before a small tech company moved in to repurpose it. They made sensors or circuit boards, something cold and metallic, the kind of thing that hummed faintly in your bones when you got too close. The company only operated during the day. Tom's job was simple: keep watch at night, patrol the empty corridors, and make sure no one broke in. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on at home. He'd gotten used to the solitude, the rhythmic buzz of the fluorescent lights, the echo of his boots down endless hallways, the soft static of the old radio he kept on the desk. But lately, that comfort had been unraveling. It started with small, quiet things. Tools left out of place, drawers open that he swore he'd closed, the faint metallic smell that would come and go like an unseen current of air. Then came the noise. The first time, it sounded like a voice carried through the ventilation ducts. He was making his rounds when he heard it. Faint, distorted. A man's voice repeating something he couldn't quite catch. He froze, listening. It was coming from the second-floor corridor, the one with the rusted restricted access sign that had been there since before the new company moved in. "Hello," Tom called out, shining his flashlight toward the end of the hall. No answer, just the steady hum of the air system. He walked toward the sound, each step echoing too loudly in the narrow space. The light flickered once, twice. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me." Tom stopped cold. It didn't sound like a prank. It sounded desperate, real. He reached for his radio, static filling the channel. "Control, this is Unit 9. I think someone's in the East Wing. I'm gonna check it out." But there was no reply. The static buzzed louder, swallowing his words. He lowered the radio slowly and continued forward. When he reached the door to the restricted area, the air was colder. His breath fogged faintly. He tried the handle locked. He leaned closer, listening, and heard something faint but steady. Breathing. Someone was on the other side. "Hey!" he called, knocking. "This is private property. You need to come out." The breathing stopped. Then, slowly, the lock clicked open on its own. He took a step back, heart hammering. The door creaked inward just enough to show blackness beyond. He shone his flashlight inside. Rows of old machinery, half dismantled, covered in tarps. The beam caught something metallic in the corner, a steel cabinet. It trembled faintly. "Anyone in here?" No response. He stepped closer, the sound of his boots muffled by the dust. When he reached the cabinet, the light flickered again, and for an instant he saw it. A hand pressed against the inside of the glass panel. Pale. Motionless. Then the lights blinked out completely. He stumbled backward, swearing, fumbling for his flashlight. When it came back on, the cabinet door was open. Empty. That night, Tom didn't finish his rounds. He sat in the security booth, staring at the monitors until dawn, every camera feed blanketed in static for just a few seconds at a time, like something was walking between them. The next day, he reported the incident to the site manager. The man listened, nodding absently. "We've had equipment malfunctions before," he said. "Old wiring. Probably nothing." But Tom noticed how the manager's eyes darted toward the restricted wing, then away again. The next few nights, Tom tried to shrug it off. But the factory didn't let him. The sounds grew stranger. The voice now came not just from the ducts but from behind walls, from corners where the light didn't reach. Sometimes it called his name. Sometimes it laughed. One night, when he checked the cameras, he saw movement on screen 6. A figure walking down the corridor, shoulders hunched, hands dragging along the walls. The timestamp showed it was live. He froze. He was supposed to be the only one in the building. He zoomed in and the camera glitched. The image twisted, the figure turning its head slowly toward the lens. The face was blurred, but the eyes were too bright, reflecting the light like an animal's. Tom grabbed his flashlight and ran. He didn't know why, just instinct. He reached the corridor in less than a minute, but it was empty. The air smelled like ozone, faint and electric. The walls were warm to the touch. He turned back toward the booth, shaking. That's when the power cut out. The emergency lights flickered red. In that pulsing glow, the shadows deepened, stretching long and wrong across the walls. His radio buzzed again. Static, then a voice whispering low, right against his ear. "Turn around." He did. A figure stood at the end of the hall. Tall. Too tall. The skin shimmered faintly like liquid metal. No face, just the impression of one that kept shifting, trying to form features it couldn't hold. It tilted its head slowly, as if studying him. Tom took one step backward, then another. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The figure's body rippled, edges distorting. Then, in a voice that was both his own and not, it said, "You shouldn't be here, Tom." He dropped the flashlight. It rolled, spilling light across the concrete floor. And in that moment, the thing stepped forward. But its feet made no sound. It passed over the beam, and for a split second he saw through it. Faint shapes flickering inside its form. Faces, dozens of them, shifting like reflections in water. He ran. He didn't remember the stairs, didn't remember the door slamming behind him. Only that when he got outside, the night air burned his lungs and the factory lights flickered like a heartbeat. He quit the next morning. When the new guard came a week later, he found Tom's old thermos still sitting on the desk. Lid unscrewed, coffee inside turned black and oily. The monitors flickered once as he sat down, and for an instant, the East Wing camera showed something standing in the corridor. A faint, silver outline, head tilted, watching. Then it disappeared. Later that night, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the radio in the booth came to life for the first time in weeks. Static. Then a voice. It was Tom's. "Don't open the door." And then silence. The scene would fade on the glow of the monitors. Static crackling softly as the camera feeds flicker through empty rooms, one by one. But in the final frame on the farthest camera, a shadow passes by, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. The cabin sat at the edge of the forest like something forgotten, half swallowed by time. It had once been part of a small mountain community, but now it stood alone. A single crooked silhouette against the endless tree line. Most people drove past without noticing it. Most except Emily Carter. She was 27, a travel photographer chasing solitude after a messy breakup and a year that had eroded everything she thought she knew about herself. When she found the listing online, remote cabin, perfect for creative retreats, it felt like fate. She wanted silence. She wanted isolation. She wanted, more than anything, to stop hearing the echo of her ex's voice in her head. The drive up was long and winding. As the road narrowed, trees grew denser, swallowing the sky. The GPS lost signal an hour before she arrived, leaving her to follow a crude map printed from the internet. When the cabin finally appeared through the mist, she felt a small flutter of relief. It looked rustic but solid. Wooden beams, stone chimney, a small porch littered with pine needles. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something older, something faintly metallic. The first day passed quietly. She unpacked her gear, brewed coffee, took photos of the fog as it rolled through the trees. By dusk, the world outside had gone gray and silent. The forest wasn't loud like she expected. No crickets, no owls, just a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. That night, she sat by the fireplace with her laptop open, sorting through photos. She froze when she saw one, a shot she didn't remember taking. It was the porch, same angle as her earlier photos, but in this one, someone was standing at the edge of the trees. She zoomed in. The figure was blurry, almost transparent, but the outline was unmistakable. Tall, thin, head tilted slightly to one side, like it was watching her. She told herself it was a lens flare, a shadow, a trick of light. She closed the laptop and went to bed. The dreams came that night, disjointed flashes of cold breath, trees moving in slow motion, and something pressing against the cabin walls, whispering in a voice that didn't use words. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. The cabin was freezing. Her breath hung in the air like smoke. The fire had gone out, but she swore she could still hear the faint crackle of burning wood. By morning, she convinced herself it was exhaustion. She hiked through the woods, taking pictures, fallen trees, frost-coated branches, animal tracks that disappeared halfway through the snow. The forest was beautiful in a desolate way, but the silence pressed on her like a weight. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel watched. That evening, as the light drained from the sky, she returned to the cabin and found something strange. The front door was open, not wide, just slightly ajar, swaying gently. She froze, camera strap tightening in her grip. "Hello?" she called. No answer. She stepped inside. Everything looked the same, her bags untouched, the firewood stacked neatly, but something in the air felt wrong. The metallic smell was stronger now, mixed with something earthy and sweet. Decay. Her camera beeped faintly in her hand, low battery. She looked down and saw that it had turned itself on. The screen displayed the last photo taken. The porch, the trees, and again that figure. Closer this time. Her heart thudded. She turned toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the forest was empty, still as glass. She locked the door that night, bolted it, double-checked the windows. She even stacked a chair under the doorknob like she'd seen in movies. Then she sat on the couch, clutching her camera, waiting for the exhaustion to finally pull her under. But sleep never came easy. Every time she started to drift, she'd hear faint noises, soft creaks from the floorboards, slow dragging sounds from the porch, and once, unmistakably, a whisper that came from the other side of the wall. At 3:17 a.m., her camera shutter clicked on its own. She bolted upright. The camera was on the table across the room, facing her. Another click. The lens adjusted, refocusing. It was taking pictures of her. "Stop!" she whispered, half delirious with fear. She rushed over, grabbed it, and turned it off. The room went silent again except for her pounding heart. In the morning, the door was open again. And in the snow outside, leading away from the porch, were footprints. Bare feet. The prints went halfway to the tree line before vanishing. She wanted to leave. Every cell in her body screamed at her to go, but the road had iced over, and her car wouldn't start. She tried the phone, no signal. The power flickered. The forest beyond the window looked almost alive now, branches trembling though there was no wind. By nightfall, she gave up trying to distract herself and began reviewing the photos on her camera again. The last few images were identical. The porch, the trees, the open door, and then one final frame, herself, asleep on the couch, taken from just a few feet away. She dropped the camera. The next few hours blurred into a haze of panic. She boarded the windows with whatever she could find, kept the fire burning, and sat clutching a kitchen knife, eyes darting to every sound. Sometime after midnight, she heard footsteps on the porch. Slow. There. The doorknob turned once, twice, then stopped. The silence that followed stretched for what felt like forever. She pressed herself against the wall, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then the whisper came again, right by her ear this time. "You shouldn't have taken our picture." The lights went out. The fire died. In the pitch darkness, her camera turned on one last time, flash firing in intervals. Each burst of light showed more of the room. The door swinging open, a shadow slipping inside, a pale hand brushing the wall. The last flash caught her face, mouth open in a scream. Then the screen went black. 2 weeks later, hikers found the cabin empty. Her belongings were untouched: clothes, camera, laptop. The only thing out of place was the camera itself, lying on the porch with the battery drained. Inside it were hundreds of photos, all taken during those final hours, each one closer, clearer, until the very last image. A pair of eyes staring directly into the lens. The sound of wind howling through the empty trees would carry us into the next story, blending with the faint static of a phone line. The transition marked by the echo of the camera shutter, clicking one last time. The call came through dispatch just after midnight. A 911 hang-up from an address on the far edge of town. The line had gone dead before the operator could get a word out. The location wasn't a house, exactly. More like an old roadside motel that had been shut down for years. Locals called it the Ridgeway Inn, though most people hadn't seen a light on there since the early 2000s. Still, protocol was protocol. Someone had called for help. Officer Daniel Hayes was the one sent to check it out. He'd been on the force 8 years, quiet, reliable, the kind of man who took double shifts and never complained. But tonight, he was running on fumes. It had been raining for hours, and the fog was thick enough to choke the headlights of his cruiser. He pulled into the gravel lot, the wipers squeaking against glass, and stared at the building ahead. The Ridgeway Inn looked like a ghost of itself. Chipped paint, boarded-up windows, a half-collapsed sign that still read vacancy, in faded red letters. His radio crackled as he stepped out. "Unit 12, you've got backup 10 minutes out," the dispatcher said. "Copy that," he replied, hand brushing his holster out of habit. The rain was softer now, more of a mist that hung in the air like smoke. He moved toward the lobby doors, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The glass was cracked but intact. He pushed the door open, and the smell hit him. Mildew, rot, and something coppery beneath it all. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with damp and age. The front desk was covered in dust. A guest book sat open, pages warped by moisture. The last entry was dated 1998. He ran his fingers across the names, frowning. Some were scratched out violently. Others were written in trembling hands. "Hello," his voice echoed. "This is Officer Hayes with County Police. We got a call from this location." No answer. He moved deeper into the lobby, the beam of his flashlight gliding across overturned chairs, peeling wallpaper, a vending machine that looked fossilized. Somewhere in the back, a door creaked open. He froze. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, faintly, a voice, soft, muffled, coming from one of the rooms down the hall. "Help me." It was a woman's voice. He followed it, boots crunching on broken glass. The hallway stretched out longer than it should have, lined with numbered doors that all hung slightly open. Room 3, Room 4, Room 5. The smell got stronger with each step, that copper scent. When he reached Room 6, he stopped. The door was closed, but the knob was cold under his hand, as if something inside was drawing the heat out of it. "Ma'am, this is the police. I'm coming in." He pushed the door open. The beam of his flashlight swept across the room. A bed covered in a plastic sheet, wallpaper curling at the seams, and in the corner, an old rotary phone hanging from the wall. The receiver dangled by its cord, gently swaying. He moved closer. The phone clicked faintly, as if trying to dial itself. Then, through the static, came a voice. "You shouldn't have come." The line went dead. Hayes froze, staring at the receiver. His pulse roared in his ears. Then something shifted behind him, the faint creak of weight on old floorboards. He spun around. Nothing. Just the open doorway, the hall stretching away into darkness. He swallowed hard and stepped backward toward the door. His flashlight flickered once, twice. Then the light caught something, a figure standing at the far end of the hall. Female. Long dark hair. Bare feet. She stood perfectly still, head bowed slightly, arms hanging limp at her sides. "Ma'am," he called, voice shaking now. "Are you the one who called?" No response. He took one cautious step forward. The figure lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale, too pale, and her eyes were wrong, black from edge to edge, like the sockets had been filled with ink. She smiled. Then the lights went out. The sound of the rain vanished, replaced by something else. Faint breathing, close to his ear though no one was near him. He stumbled backward, flashlight clattering to the ground. The beam rolled across the floor, catching flashes of movement. Hands crawling out from under the other doors, pale and trembling, fingertips leaving wet streaks on the wood. Hayes drew his weapon, shouting, "Stop! Stay where you are." But his voice came out hollow, like it was being swallowed by the walls. Then, from the phone behind him, the rotary began spinning again. Click, 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 click. He turned just in time to see it stop on a single number. 6. The receiver lifted on its own, hanging in midair, and from the speaker came his own voice, distorted and low. "You shouldn't have come." He ran. The hallway seemed endless now, the doors on either side slamming shut as he passed, one after another, the sound like thunder. The exit sign flickered red at the far end, the only light in the dark. He sprinted toward it, lungs burning. He burst through the door into the rain-soaked night, gasping for air. His cruiser headlights were still on, cutting through the fog like twin blades. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. There's static." He tried again. Nothing. Then, from behind him, the lobby lights flickered on, every bulb glowing bright white through the rain-streaked glass. A figure stood just inside the doorway. The same woman, still smiling, her hand lifted slowly, waving. Hayes froze, trembling. The lights blinked out. The building was dark again. He didn't wait for backup. He got in the car, started the engine, and drove. Fast. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, his stomach turned to ice. The back seat wasn't empty. A woman sat there, dripping wet, head bowed. He swerved, heart hammering. Jesus Christ! He turned around, but the seat was empty. Just rainwater soaking into the fabric. When backup finally arrived 15 minutes later, they found Hayes' car parked on the roadside, engine running, headlights cutting through empty fog. The officer was gone. The driver's door hung open, rain pouring onto the seat. Inside the motel lobby, the phone had fallen off the hook. The line buzzed faintly, then clicked once, as if someone had picked up on the other end. "Room 6, a woman's voice whispered. "He's here now." The story would fade with the sound of rain on glass, the phone's static slowly morphing into the hum of city traffic. A transition into the next account. One that begins not in a forgotten motel, but in the heart of a crowded apartment building, where something unseen watches through the vents. The apartment building was one of those massive concrete towers that loomed over the city like a monument to monotony. 23 floors, identical beige walls, the faint hum of cheap fluorescent lights that never quite went out. The kind of place where hundreds of people lived together and yet no one really knew anyone. It was easy to disappear there. Easy to not be noticed at all. For Mia, that anonymity was exactly what she wanted. She just moved in 2 months ago, after a breakup and a move across the country. The rent was cheap, the lease was short, and the place was quiet, or at least it had been at first. Her apartment was on the 15th floor, a small studio with peeling paint and a window view of the city skyline. The noise of traffic was distant enough to lull her to sleep, but lately, that peaceful hum had been replaced by something else. It started one night when she woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of breathing. Slow, steady, unmistakably human, but not hers. It was faint, coming from somewhere near the wall by her bed. She froze, listening. When she turned on the light, the sound stopped instantly, leaving her in that terrible silence that makes you question your own sanity. She thought it was her imagination. Stress, maybe. She'd been working long hours at her design job, barely eating, barely sleeping. But the next night it happened again. Only louder. This time she traced it, pressing her ear to the wall, and realized it was coming from the air vent. A long, narrow vent set just above her headboard. When she leaned closer, she could hear the sound more clearly. A faint inhale, followed by a raspy exhale. And then something else, a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, just the cadence, as though someone was murmuring right behind the grate, too softly to understand. She told herself it had to be another tenant. Maybe the ventilation system carried sound from one apartment to another. Thin walls, bad insulation, it made sense. She laughed it off, recorded a short clip on her phone, and planned to complain to maintenance in the morning. But when she played the recording back, her blood ran cold. The whisper was louder in the playback, and this time it wasn't random mumbling. It was clear, a voice whispering her name. Mia. She deleted the recording immediately. That night she barely slept. Every creak, every hum, every flicker of light made her heart jump. By morning, she was exhausted, her nerves frayed raw. At work, she tried to focus, but she kept catching herself glancing toward the vents in the office ceiling. Every little hiss of air made her skin crawl. When she got home that evening, the apartment felt different. Colder, like the air itself had been disturbed. She stood by the door for a moment, just listening. Nothing. She turned on the lights, kicked off her shoes, and tried to shake it off. But then she noticed something odd. Her bed had been moved slightly. Not much, just a few inches from the wall. Enough to leave faint scuff marks on the floor. She froze. She hadn't moved it. Mia. The whisper came again, soft, right behind her. She spun toward the vent. The metal grill vibrated slightly, as though air was rushing through, but the fan wasn't running. She approached slowly, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear anything else. "Who's there?" she said, voice trembling. The whisper stopped. For the next few days, the sounds continued. Not every night, but often enough to keep her on edge. The whispers grew bolder, clearer. Sometimes she'd hear faint laughter. Sometimes it was her name, drawn out in a long, almost affectionate tone. One evening, she came home to find a maintenance notice slipped under her door. Routine HVAC inspection Tuesday 2 p.m. She felt relieved. Finally, someone else would look at it. Tuesday came. She stayed home from work, waiting. At 2 p.m. sharp, there was a knock on her door. A man in coveralls stood there, middle-aged, kind face, name tag that read Frank. "Here for the vent inspection," he said. She let him in. He set down his toolbox, pulled up a chair, and started unscrewing the vent cover. The air inside the duct was cold. He frowned, shining a flashlight into the dark tunnel. "Strange," he muttered. "Looks like someone's been messing with this." "What do you mean?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He reached in farther, then pulled something out. A small scrap of fabric, old and stained. It looked like part of a shirt. Mia's stomach twisted. "That could have just fallen in," he said, forcing a laugh. But she could see it in his face. The unease. He packed up quickly, said he'd report it to building management, and left without another word. That night, she dreamed she was crawling through the vents. Endless metal tunnels stretching in every direction, the sound of breathing surrounding her. When she woke, she realized she could still hear it, that same slow inhale and exhale. She sat up. The vent grill was gone. Not broken, not hanging, just gone. Behind the hole, she saw darkness, deep and endless. The whisper came again, louder now. "Mia, come see." She scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door. The whisper followed, closer, shifting from one vent to another, circling her. "Mia, don't leave." She grabbed her keys and ran into the hallway, slamming the door behind her. The air outside was freezing, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She knocked on her neighbor's door, a man in his 40s named Alan. He opened, bleary-eyed and confused. "I think someone's in my vents," she gasped. He stared at her. "The vents?" "Yes, please come look." He hesitated but finally followed. When they opened her apartment door, everything was silent again. The air was still. The vent grill was back in place. Alan checked around, shrugged. "Nothing there," he said. "You probably heard the pipes. This place is old." She tried to smile, to pretend he was right, but when she glanced at the vent, she noticed something new. A faint smear of dark residue around the edges, as though something had been pushed in from the other side. Alan left soon after, muttering something about getting more sleep. Mia didn't stay another night. She packed her bag, grabbed her camera, and headed to her car. But as she reached the elevator, she heard it again. Faint, coming from the ceiling vent above her head. "Mia!" She didn't look up. She jabbed the button over and over until the doors closed. The next morning, the building superintendent let himself into her unit after getting complaints of water leaking into the apartment below. He found the carpet soaked, the vent dripping with condensation. When he pulled the grill off, a strong stench filled the room, rot and mold. He shone his flashlight inside and froze. There were photos taped to the inside of the duct. Dozens of them. All of Mia, sleeping, cooking, standing by the window, taken from angles that suggested someone had been inside the vents for weeks. But the most recent photo, taped front and center, showed her standing in the hallway outside her apartment, taken from directly above, as though the ceiling itself had been watching. The screen would fade to black on the echo of that whisper one last time, "Mia," before dissolving into the next story's opening. The mechanical hum of a hospital ventilator, the steady beeping of a heart monitor, and the sterile light of a place where life and death meet in the thinnest possible space. The hospital at night was a place where silence wasn't really silence. It was a layering of sounds, the distant hiss of oxygen tanks, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the muffled wheels of a gurney rolling down the linoleum floor. Every noise carried the weight of someone's suffering, someone's last breath, someone's quiet goodbye. Eli had worked the night shift for almost 7 years. He was a nurse in the palliative care wing, the ward where time moved differently. Patients came there not to get better, but to fade in comfort. The air was always thick with antiseptic and the faint scent of wilted flowers left behind by families who couldn't bear to stay. He was used to strange things. Machines malfunctioning without reason. Lights flickering in rooms moments before a patient passed. Doors that creaked open slowly even when there was no draft. The other nurses joked that the building was haunted, but Eli didn't like to joke about that. He'd seen too much, felt too much to laugh it off. It was early winter when he noticed something different. Room 313, one of the older ones at the end of the hall, had been empty for months after the last patient died there. The bed was stripped bare, the blinds half drawn. Yet, for the past few nights, he'd seen the light inside flicker on around 2 a.m. He thought it was a power glitch at first. But then he started hearing the call button from that room going off, ringing faintly at the nurse's station. When he'd go to check, the bed would be empty, the monitor unplugged, the button itself resting on the sheets like someone had just set it down. He told maintenance. They replaced the wiring. But the next night it happened again. By the 4th night, he was too uneasy to ignore it. So he decided to check the security footage. The cameras in that hallway were grainy and black and white, but clear enough to see movement. He fast-forwarded to 1:59 a.m., watching the timestamp tick by. At 2:03, the light in room 313 flicked on. No one entered. No shadows, no footsteps. Just sudden light, flooding the hall from the open door. And then something else. The curtain by the bed moved, slowly, as though someone had brushed their hand against it from the inside. Eli leaned back in his chair, his skin prickling. He could feel his heart in his throat. He thought about showing it to security, but he knew what they'd say. Old wiring, sensor malfunction. Don't work too many doubles. Still, the next night, curiosity won. He made sure he was the one assigned to that hall. Around 1:50 a.m., he turned off the lights at the station and stood quietly by the corner, where he could see room 313 down the corridor. The hall was dim, the overhead bulbs humming faintly. Every step he took echoed too loud. The air felt thick, almost heavy, like it was pressing down on him. At 2:01, the light in the room flicked on again. Eli froze. He waited, barely breathing. A soft shape, faint, translucent, moved behind the curtain. He took a step closer, the sound of his shoes against the floor impossibly loud in the stillness. The curtain fluttered again, though the air was perfectly still. He reached for the doorframe, his fingers trembling. "Hello?" he whispered. The curtain stopped moving. Then, a voice, faint, rasping, came from behind it. "Is it time for my medicine?" Eli's body went cold. He'd heard that voice before. He was sure of it. It belonged to Mr. Holbrook, the last patient who'd stayed in room 313. The man had passed away 6 months ago, quietly, in his sleep. Eli had been the one to close his eyes. He took another cautious step forward. "Mr. Holbrook?" The curtain trembled, then parted just slightly, enough for Eli to see the empty bed. The voice came again, right behind him this time. "I can't feel my hands." Eli spun around, but the room was empty. His reflection in the window stared back at him, pale and wide-eyed. He turned back to the bed and stopped. The sheets were indented, as though someone were lying there. Slowly, the indent shifted, like invisible limbs moving beneath the blanket. The monitor on the wall flickered to life, beeping steadily, displaying a heart rate. 74 BPM. Eli stumbled back, knocking into the four-stand. The heart rate climbed 90, 112, 130, before flatlining with a long, piercing tone. The light cut out instantly. The room was plunged into darkness. He ran. By the time he reached the nurse's station, his co-workers were staring at him, wide-eyed. "You okay?" one asked. He nodded shakily, trying to steady his breath. Just a power surge. Room 313. They exchanged looks. That room's power line was shut off last month, another nurse said. Eli didn't answer. He went back the next morning to check. When the sun was up and the halls were full of life again. The light in 313 was still off. The monitor unplugged. But on the pillow there was an imprint, the faint shape of a head. He asked the janitor about it later. The old man hesitated before speaking. That room's been strange since before you got here. It wasn't always a patient room. Used to be a storage area. But back in the 90s there was a fire. One of the nurses died trying to save a man who couldn't move. They say, she never left. Eli tried to laugh it off. You mean the call light? The janitor nodded. It goes off sometimes, right? Yeah. Then she's still doing her rounds. That night, Eli avoided that hallway altogether. But just after 2 a.m., the intercom at the nurse's station crackled to life. Room 313 needs assistance. The voice wasn't synthetic. It wasn't the standard pre-recorded tone used for patient alerts. It was soft, feminine, familiar. Eli stared at the monitor, his blood turning to ice. The intercom clicked again, quieter this time. He's not breathing. He grabbed his flashlight, against every instinct screaming at him not to go. The hallway stretched before him like an endless tunnel. When he reached the door, the light was on again, the curtain swaying gently. He stepped inside. Who's here? The curtain stilled. And then, from the other side, a woman's voice, calm, sorrowful. You should rest now, Eli. It's almost your turn. The flashlight flickered, then went out. A loud crash echoed from the hall. His co-workers came running. When they opened the door, the room was dark, empty, except for the faint impression of two figures on the bed. One large, one small. Eli was found the next morning, asleep at the nurse's station, pale and disoriented. When they checked the security footage, they saw him enter room 313 at 2:04 a.m. But he never came out. The last frame showed the curtain fluttering gently, as if someone had just lain down for a final rest. The transition to the next story begins in that same soft mechanical hum, the beeping of hospital monitors fading into the whir of an old tape recorder, the grain of static blending with a man's trembling voice as he recounts what happened to him in a motel deep in the Nevada desert, where the mirrors didn't quite reflect what they should have. The motel sat alone on a long, empty stretch of Nevada highway, the kind of place you'd only stop if you were desperate. Its flickering neon sign read Sunset Haven, though there was nothing haven-like about it. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, the desert wind howling across the cracked asphalt, as if warning travelers to keep moving. But Daniel had been driving for 14 hours, and exhaustion had a way of dulling fear. The woman at the front desk didn't look up when he entered. Her skin looked waxy in the dim light, her smile too slow to reach her eyes. Room 12, she said flatly, sliding the key across the counter. No mirrors in the room. Management policy. He blinked. No mirrors. Too many complaints, she said, turning away before he could ask more. The room smelled faintly of dust and cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was peeling. The bedspread faded to gray. True to her word, there were no mirrors, just bare patches where frames once hung. The bathroom had one too, but it was covered with a sheet of cardboard duct-taped over the glass. He was too tired to care. He collapsed onto the bed and was asleep in minutes. Sometime after midnight, a sound woke him. Soft tapping. He sat up, heart pounding. Came again, steady, deliberate, from the direction of the bathroom. He turned on the lamp. Hello? No answer. He walked to the door, every step echoing louder than it should. The air in the room felt colder now. When he reached the bathroom, the cardboard covering was gone. The mirror was uncovered and fogged. He wiped a small circle clear. For a moment, he only saw himself, pale and groggy. But then, just behind his reflection, something moved. A faint shape, a figure standing in the dark behind him. He spun around. Nothing. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer. It looked like him, same hair, same face, but the reflection didn't move when he did. It just stared, eyes slightly too wide, smile curling in slow, unnatural motion. Daniel stumbled backward, nearly tripping. The lights flickered. The reflection tilted its head, as if studying him. Then, its lips moved. "Stay!" The light blew out completely. He bolted for the door, yanking it open, rushing into the hallway lit only by the red glow of an exit sign. He didn't stop until he reached his car. When he looked back, the neon Sunset Haven sign was still flickering. But now, in its reflection on his windshield, every letter was backward, perfectly clear, like a mirror showing him what shouldn't exist. He drove until dawn. When he finally pulled into a diner 50 miles away, he stumbled inside, shaking, asking for a phone to call the police. The waitress looked up and frowned. "You okay, sir?" He nodded weakly, glancing at the window beside him. In the reflection of the glass, the motel key hung from his hand again, even though he'd left it behind on the counter.